Welcome to Accessible, where we open the door to the people and ideas shaping the disability community. I'm George Gatto.
And I'm Amelia Reigard.
On Accessible, we talk with leaders, advocates, researchers, and individuals with lived experience to explore the issues shaping the disability field.
Accessible is produced in partnership with the Missouri Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, or LEND, and the Missouri University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, or UCED for short.
And whether you work in the field, are connected personally to disability, or simply want to better understand how systems can support people with disabilities, Accessible opens the door to conversations that matter.
We're excited to be back for Season 5. Our first 4 episodes focus on advocacy in action.
Advocacy happens on many levels, from public policy to workplaces to everyday decisions in our communities.
In this series, we're exploring how people turn their values into action.
And no matter what your role, there's a place for you in advocacy.
Well, today on Accessible, we had the pleasure of talking with 2 guests from the Missouri Developmental Disabilities Council. We got to talk to Christina Ingoglia, who's Director of Policy Advocacy, and Dr. Tony Taylor, who is one of their members and the chair of their Legislative Policy Committee. And this season, we've been doing a lot of episodes talking about advocacy. And we've talked about individual advocacy. We've talked about how do I advocate in my professional role, wearing my professional hat. And today we really focused a lot on systems level advocacy, specifically through legislative advocacy. So it was a really great conversation with Christina and Tony to talk a little bit about how they're engaging in systems level advocacy.
Absolutely. I left that conversation. I'm feeling really pumped up and excited to do some advocacy, just because I thought
ready to send some emails to some legislators. Let's go.
I'm thinking, like, what kind of one-pagers could we create that would, be helpful to do some systems level advocacy. So I thought it was a great conversation. And what I really loved was a lot of sort of the kind of the real life experience that they provided. Tony in particular with his, his son and his daughter and their businesses. It was pretty powerful, like the way that they are using Medicaid supports to really become engaged in their community, to be fully employed, and et cetera. That's great. I just loved that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like it totally shatters some of those misnomers about Medicaid just in his personal story. Like 3 sentences and anyone's misconceptions is just about how it's for people who are trying to take advantage of the system or they don't want to work or something.
Yeah.
It's just completely the opposite for his family. And I'm so glad that he's on the DD Council and he's out there telling his story. I think it's extremely powerful.
Absolutely. The other thing I really liked about that conversation was just the talk about self-directed supports and how important they are. And, that's one of the things that is up, on the chopping block right now. So the information they provide about self-directed supports was phenomenal, I thought.
Yeah, and I think one thing when it comes to legislative advocacy, even if it's writing an email right to your representative, I think there's a lot of overwhelm with, 1, does my voice matter, but 2, how do I know what to talk about, or how do I put it into words, or how feeling like you have to be the expert on the policy. And I think, and I've heard people in my own life say, well, this just is, it's so complicated, it can't be understood. And I think I think that's, false, and something that gets people to not be involved is that it can't be understood as too complex. But I really like what Christina said. She said, it's my job to be the expert because I'm the director of policy advocacy, but that you don't have to be the expert to, speak up. You don't have to be a policy expert. You have to just be an expert on your own life and being able to talk about how you're being impacted by different changes in state law, local law, federal law. And she gave us a lot of really great resources. There's a lot of organizations, including the DD Council, but there's organizations that are tracking policy, and they are educating the public. And so there's a lot of information that you can grab onto to say, what can I learn? And then what can I do? And I'm sure we'll have lots of stuff Catherine will put in the show notes. But I think that was a takeaway for me, is like, I don't have to be the expert on everything. And there's some people out there who are doing that work so that I can figure out how to get involved as it relates to my story or my family or my life.
Yeah. And shout out to Christina. I mean, didn't that whole conversation just make you feel like, oh, I can do this? She just is like really, made me feel like, oh, if I had a question, I could go to her. Or, we do, through lived experience and our own experience, have the ability to just advocate for systems level changes.
Yeah, I mean, those people are there to represent us, and so it's their job to listen. We just have to extend ourselves to share our perspective. And yeah, I feel like the way they talked about advocacy as like relationships, I thought was really good too.
Absolutely.
The way Tony was like, yeah, you can invite them over for coffee, like a person when they're in your district, like your representative. And I was like, I never thought to do that.
Like, I can't.
Like, can you imagine how much more, like, I don't know, how much more impactful that would be for someone to like come into your home and see what your life is like. And especially if you're someone who's benefiting from Medicaid services or whatever, to see that like this is kind of this is the reality for me. And and you also, like, legislators also can't be the expert on everything, and so we are helping them out by educating them on things they only know.
That's right.
Their lane, they can't be the expert on everything, so they legitimately do rely on their constituents and advocacy organizations like the DD Council to make sure that they're paying attention to the things that matter. So
well said, Catherine.
Well,
with that, I guess we should get on with it, right? Listen to
Should we warn people, like
today.
We did have some delay issues.
Yeah, it was
so,
a little glitchy, but
just a little bit. Just, a bunch of people in different areas of the country trying to do a podcast, but the conversation it soars through technical difficulties.
Absolutely.
So
stick with it.
Just hang in there. We did.
We did. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Enjoy.
All right. Well, we are very excited today to continue our series on advocacy, and today we have Christina Ingoglia and Dr. Tony Taylor, both who have a different role within the Missouri Developmental Disabilities Council. And so maybe that's where we could start, is maybe Christina, start with you, and then maybe tell us a little bit about what the Developmental Disability Council is and does, and your role within the council.
Sure. Thank you for having us. So I am the Policy Advocacy Director for MODDC, as George said. And under federal law, our charge is to look at barriers people with developmental disabilities may be encountering, and then trying to eliminate or fix or improve systems that are barriers. So we are not a service provider. We are not doing one-to-one advocacy helping others, but we look at whole systems and use our council to help drive our work. So when we say whole systems, right now we're spending a lot of time on legislative advocacy, so talking to legislators. But we were established under a law called the DD Rehabilitation Act, much like UMKC that you said. And so we really are seen as sort of the advocacy arm of that piece of our work.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll just, for quick reference, just say we are sister organizations in that we, both the University Center for Excellence in Disability and the DD Council and the Missouri Protection Advocacy all exist as a result of the DD Act. Now, the council has staff, and then there are actual council members. And Tony, I understand you're a council member. Can you talk about your role and what you do with the DD Council?
Sure, absolutely. I appreciate it. And thank you for your time today. Thank you for having us on. Appreciate that. I was appointed to the council in June of 2024 by the governor at the time, Governor Parsons. And so I've been appointed to a 3-year term that will expire in the summer of 2027.
Mm-hmm. And what do council members do?
So council members, there are 22 council members that are appointed, and they actually advocate for all of the thousands of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities within the state of Missouri. So I see it as a great opportunity to not only represent my own 2 children. I say children, but I just had one turn 18. So I guess my 2 adults. That makes me sound old, but I'm not only representing my own 2, but the thousands in Missouri. And so I consider it an honor to be appointed. And since becoming a member, I've also been elected to be the council secretary, as well as the chairperson for the legislative and public policy committee. So
wow. So is that a fully voluntary role?
It is. Yeah. It's so the council meets 6 times a year for a couple of days, and I consult. So I just try my best to flex my time around those meetings and prioritize those throughout the year. So.
And Tony did take a trip with me to Washington, D.C. earlier and may do so again. And worth mentioning, more than about 2/3 of our council is made up of adult self-advocates with developmental disabilities, as well as family members. There are representatives from agencies in the state and other organizations, but we prioritize the voice of families and individuals to speak for themselves.
Great. Yeah, I know that we have a representative from the USAID, but who and that's Colette Controla Cox, but she's also a parent, so she's filling both of those roles, I guess. Well, one question I have based on that then is, why is it, do you think, important that members of the DD Council have lived experience, either as a person with a disability or as a family member?
I think there's a relatability based on lived experiences. Until you have the experience of IDD within your home, you may have a head knowledge, but without that lived experience, you don't have the 360-degree, full circle picture of what that really is and means and how that's defined. So it would be difficult, if not impossible, to represent a population of which you're not really part of, if that makes sense.
I would add that I think it's really important to establish that we're not beholden to, though we work with service providers and we work with other organizations, we can have our own agenda and really drive it based on the lived experience and council members like Tony. And I will say too, although I'm here as a professional, I am a parent as well to an 11-year-old with developmental disabilities. So that definitely informs my work as well.
How does the council and the voices of those with lived experience come up with your priority areas when you're talking about legislative advocacy? And with terms, I assume that sometimes those priorities change based on who's kind of at the table at that time, raising certain issues that they care about. Kind of how do you guys navigate all that?
Those are proposed within the council, and democracy rules and reigns. We vote on what the topics are that we're going to address during a specific period of time. And so we also have staff members that represent, as well as us as volunteers. So there's a lot of guidance from everyone at the table. So there's a collective agreement to the direction and also the relevancy. Right now, there's such a relevant need to look at, for example, the landscape with regard to Medicaid and what's coming down the pipe with that. Home and community-based services, and there's a lot of advocacy that has been happening and continues to happen in those arenas. So it just simply makes sense for the council to prioritize those things that are they're impacting Missourians so heavily, and there's a relevancy to that and a real priority.
I'll share that we have to be flexible because we are establishing priorities, typically fall late, like this by late December for sure, but prior to the Missouri legislative session, which runs January to May. And so we're predicting a little bit what's coming, but based on what happened with the federal government passing H.R. 1, otherwise known as the One Big Beautiful Bill, we sort of anticipated that Medicaid cuts were on the horizon, if not this session, then the next. And we also anticipated some other challenges from that. And so really, we're very focused in on potential cuts to developmental disability waivers that support people like my own daughter and Tony's kids to help them stay in their own natural homes in the communities, which is always better for the individual.
Mm-hmm. And when we think about the HCBS services, are there particular services that you guys are anticipating or believe would be cut more than others, or is it just Medicaid across the board? Like what are the if we dig into the details, what are those details?
Yeah. Well, we know from January 13th, when the governor released his proposed Missouri budget bills, that he put on the table cuts to day program habilitation services. So providers would get lower rates for their employees, which they're already saying is going to immediately impact the people they serve. And they're also concerned about how the decision was made. There was no sort of actuarial or scientific study to show what the actual rate is. So I think from the provider perspective, they're asking the governor and the whole state government to at least do a proper rate study before they offer up cuts there. As far as the other side, where we're seeing incredible cuts, self-directed services. So these are home and community-based services that are typically in the home. My own daughter uses personal assistance hours, but it also could include medical personal assistance, maybe for someone who needs like a trach sucked or a colostomy bag change or the nature of those things. So right now, the cap that families and individuals can pay their staff for medical PA is $33 per hour. And there's a reason for that. The PAs are very trained. And unlike direct support professionals who work for an agency, these individuals are not given benefits. They don't have paid time off. They don't have health insurance. So it is a larger number and might be shocking to some, but there's good reason for that. And in the regular PA program currently, you can pay a maximum of $29 per hour for similar reasons. The governor's proposal will cut both of those down to a maximum of about $23 per hour. Families and individuals are very scared that they're going to lose their staff because I don't know about you, but if you hear that you are going to keep your job but have a 30% pay cut, you might not stick around for that. In addition, they've zeroed out two programs, the Community Specialist Program and the Individualized Goods and Services Program. The Community Specialist Program is about $1.5 million. It's not a huge piece of home and community-based services, but it's a way that you can help train all of your staff. This individual will, for example, meet, say, with Tony's daughter and find out that she wants to sell her t-shirts, and they'll come up with a plan to help, his daughter get out in the community and help staff understand where she can be, what she can do, all of that good stuff. So it's someone who comes in and does research for you and kind of establishes a healthy playbook for the individual to really emphasize what they're interested in. Individualized goods and services is a much smaller program. It's about $10,000. So really zeroing it out is not going to save the state much money, but it pays for things that Medicaid won't or the waiver won't. So things like music therapy and things of that nature.
I was going to say I think when people hear Medicaid, they think access to healthcare. And just in the examples you gave, Christina, that there's so much more when it comes to supporting people to live independently in the community and access employment and access, the lives that they want to build for themselves, that it's
it's bigger than that. And so I guess, like, Dr. Taylor, when you think about how you talk to legislators, or when you went to DC and did advocacy, or how do you explain Medicaid and the services and the access that it gives your adult children in their daily lives, like in a way that makes sense to people?
I try to communicate that it's empowerment more than really, my two children, they don't have the need for syringes or feeding tubes or other medical necessities that a lot of individuals have a real need in those arenas. And so Medicaid does go beyond that so far that my adult son, for example, he'll be 27 on the 4th of July. And a little over 5 years ago, actually February 21st, we just celebrated 5 years that he's been doing vending services in the Kansas City area. So JonahVending.com was originated to give our son a purpose. And without the Medicaid funding, I hate to admit this, but he would probably be at home with not much happening in his life. And, his ability to be in the community and to be a blessing to others, as well as to be blessed by the opportunity to be in the community, is only possible through the funding that he receives and through the personal assistance that is part of that budget. So if you cut that, not only my son Jonah, but so many hundreds or thousands of others are in the exact same position, that their livelihood, their joy will be minimized or possibly extinguished. I don't mean to be dramatic, but I look at my son and what all he does, and every time he puts on a shirt that has a whale with an autism ribbon on it to represent his company, he smiles ear to ear, and he knows that he's going to stock one or more of all of his 35 vending machines in the Kansas City area. And it's all been possible because small to medium-sized businesses that large vending companies ignore, Jonah non-verbally raises his hand and says, I'll take those. I'll do that. And then because of the village and the team around him, he's able to do that. And the funding is such a huge part of that it allows that engine to have the gas and the oil to be able to run.
Yeah, when most people think Medicaid, they think of health insurance for people in poverty, for pregnant women, for children, et cetera, and people with disabilities to some extent. And for developmental disabilities, yes, these waivers that our children and other adults have do include insurance. But with the waiver, they also get this, range of services that's incredibly important.
Yeah. I think that awareness piece is really huge when you're talking about those cuts and talking about, I think with HR1 being passed, and there was a lot of talk around that time around these work requirements tied to Medicaid, right? And just even hearing Dr. Taylor's story about his two children, that this funding's actually allowed them to be self-employed business owners, right? That it's been enabling that type of community participation is really good awareness of what actually all Medicaid does cover and how it really supports people.
Can you talk, Tony, a little bit more about? I love that story. So, what exactly does Medicaid support? Like, what supports does it provide?
My son Jonah,
for your son?
Again, we started in February of 2021 with his vending services, and the Medicaid funding allows that personal assistant, if I can speak clearly, to transport him into the community to his locations where his vending machines are, assist him with getting product in, opening up vending machines, making sure he's safe in the community, all the things that Jonah independently would not be able to do on his own. And then our daughter Jaylee just turned 18. She's finishing high school in May. And we started Jaylee GTs, and she's doing T-shirts and apparel and using a heat press and making custom as well as pre-printed graphics on shirts. So that will be a portion of her world going forward. And her annual plan will start in April with employment services and additional supports as well. So, it's just one portion, like Christina said, of the funding, but in our home and with our two young adult children, none of that would be possible without those supports.
Right. How is when you go and you talk with legislators about this, whether it's at the state or the national level, what is their response? It seems like they would be excited about this, seeing that, this is these are the types of services that really have an impact on a person's life and help with community inclusion. And I don't know. I'm just curious what legislators are saying as you talk with them.
There's just a huge awareness that may not have been there before. You could kind of visibly see some light bulbs going on. There's some connections made. And I think regardless of what happens from then, it's more information that they didn't have prior. So as families, not only council members, but as families across the state of Missouri begin to share their voices, share their lived experiences, tell their family story or personal story if they're a self-advocate, that information is not lost. It's retained and remembered by these decision makers. And there really is power in that advocacy, not only for the personal individual advocacy, but definitely for systems change, because those multiple stories add up and create a profound impact. For example, last week, our family attended DRLD, the Disability Rights Legislative Day in Jefferson City. And Christina led a team of individuals, did a phenomenal job. And, they were anticipating about 800 people to show up. And there were over 1,200 at the Rotunda at the Capitol in Jefferson City, Missouri. So while Christina's on this interview, and she'll be interviewed about a lot of things, I don't think she's gonna ring her own bell like I will right here, because I was I was a participant in my family, and our family laughs about that because it's not an easy process to take an entire family, especially with two individuals with special needs, and travel for multiple hours to Jefferson. It's not an easy process, but it's worth the effort. It's worth the attendance. And so we take what we call our annual bench photo. The four of us are on a bench eating our lunch out of our sack lunches. And, we do a selfie across all four of us, and it's a great time. But the purpose is beyond the fun time. It's a great trip and a fun time, but the purpose of that, having a unified voice across 1,200 individuals, has power. It has a moment of remembrance across the entire Missouri state, representatives and senators, everyone that day. I mean, the traffic, the security, people crawling all over the Capitol, you can't ignore that.
Yeah. I would like to jump in here. I agree with you, Tony, and thank you for the shout out. It was a lot of work, but it was well worth it. I would say prior to MODDC, I did work for a service provider. So I was following these issues from that perspective, right? Prior to getting to MODDC in August. And so we have been advocating in Washington, D.C., since more than a year ago, when we heard that the Big Beautiful Bill was a thing and potential cuts. And I will say, a lot of all of our elected officials in DC will tell us directly, or their staff will tell us, we have no intention of harming the people you serve. And I do believe them. They seem very concerned about fraud. And really, in the DD world, the fraction of fraud is so small because the bar is so high to get a waiver and to prove that you continually need it. We have to distinguish our services, home and community-based services, from your general population. But we do also share with them that there are people with IDD who are in the expansion population, or who in the regular Medicaid population, who maybe just don't need as much support in the community potentially. So a cut anywhere in that spectrum of services is going to impact people with disabilities, no doubt. I will say, when these federal legislators say they don't want to hurt us, we believe them, but all the federal legislators had to do was cut the amount of funding. And they didn't have to cut services, but now their colleagues in Jefferson City at the state level will have to make those cuts because our budget is in such a difficult position right now. Officially, not all of the Medicaid cuts have come down from the federal government yet. However, with Governor Kehoe's proposal to eliminate the income tax, which was on the table, which is about 60% of our state budget, with other bills on the table and proposals to eliminate or curb property tax and personal property tax, we're concerned that the state won't have the funding to maintain these services when even the state legislators tell us they have no intention of harming the people we represent and serve. I will say, thanks to a huge grassroots movement of families who are concerned with SDS and individuals, as well as the work of MODDC and Starling, the Provider Association, and many others, Jefferson City is hearing from a lot of people. Many legislators have said they've never gotten so much communication before on any one issue, which is good. We've had some direct discussion with Representative Darren Chappell, who's over the subcommittee that oversees the Medicaid budget and makes recommendations to the larger House Budget Committee. And he's very supportive. He's gone on public record saying he wants to restore the cuts that Governor Kehoe proposed. However, he can just make recommendations. And while we appreciate his recommendations, we know that there's going to be some tough decisions ahead, because he also has to cut an additional $500 million from DHSS, DSS, and DMH, which is where our home and community-based services live. But those other programs also support people with IDD.
Yeah, and it's amazing that you guys are keeping track of all of these things and making them legislative advocacy priorities. I'm thinking about, a lot of our listeners are either graduate students or they're about to enter the field, right? Whether that's through social work or special education or through many of the therapies or medical fields. And so, and there's been a real interest in advocacy, right? With all of these things happening at a federal and a state level. And so, you've talked, both of you, about systems level advocacy and systems level change, right, in this episode. And so I just wonder if you talk a little bit about how individuals that kind of see where harm might take place, right, see where the impact of these changes might happen, and how can they become involved in sort of legislative advocacy if they wanted to. What would the steps be? What would you guys recommend?
So on a very basic level, you can definitely sign up for our newsletter. And if possible, I'll share the link with Catherine and you all so that you can share it with your audience, because we do put out updates at least monthly, but during session more frequently. Some are shorter, just, hey, here's an important thing going on that you should know about. I would also say, volunteering for some organizations who are doing advocacy. So if there's a provider in your community who's going up to the Capitol and you get services from them, or someone who gets services, or you might even want to work for them, you could reach out and say, are you going to the Capitol? I'd like to join you to tell your own story. And really, that's how I got started as a volunteer of doing legislative advocacy. I also think, staying on top of news sources like the Missouri Independent. It's a free publication. It's online only. In the last week or so, they have covered a ton of stories about, and really the last few weeks, about these potential cuts and the reaction from families and individuals, and what legislators are saying about it. That's good. I also think social media is important. Following your legislators, not trolling them, but asking questions and offering to reach out. And I think too, even saying to your own legislator, hey, when you're back in district, which is typically Friday to Sunday during legislative session, or summer through December, June through December, you can ask them to go out for coffee and talk about, or wherever you're comfortable, they could come to your home if that's your comfort zone, but ask them to see what your services are like and how, what life would be like without those services. So I think there's you can take a lot of different actions potentially, but it's just incumbent upon all of us to do something. Even if you view it as small, like sending an email, that's actually really big. Because not everyone can go to the Capitol for accessibility reasons and access to transportation reasons, and also just perhaps an inflexible job schedule. So really, it's about doing something. And we do put out action alerts. Starling does as well. And there are some other MAC-DDS, which is the Missouri Association of Developmental Disability Council boards. They are also putting out action alerts. So those are your SB40 boards. So here in St. Louis County, it would be the Productive Living Board of St. Louis County, or the PLB. Out near Tony, it would be ETOS. So finding, if you're getting services from them, they're very concerned about the cuts to property tax and personal property tax, because that's the majority of their funding.
I mean, just to piggyback and kind of highlight, Christina hit on a really key concept that even if you're homebound, you're not able to travel, you're not able to do some of the things remotely, email, telephone, and again, those representatives, when they are not in session and they're local, they can come to your home. They can see you right where you're at. They are your representatives and your senators, and they are still, to use the old phrase, they are working for you. And so that is their responsibility as your elected representatives and senators. And so to understand, if it's possible, even locally, to attend school board meetings, to attend, any kind of local meet and greets, that a lot of times elected officials do those at libraries or public locations, community locations right where you're at. And so there's a lot that can be done without traveling to Jefferson City or Washington, D.C. or elsewhere. So I think it's just kind of doing the next step, and there's always a next step.
I'm probably talking too much here, but I would add it's a bit paradoxical if you think about it, because while we are focused on systems change and not just doing one-to-one advocacy, we need everyone to do that, individual advocacy. And really, it all boils down to relationship building. So if we sit with a legislator for an hour or have them to our home for an hour, they're going to remember you better than if you just, ran into their office at the Capitol and said, help. Not that those things aren't important too, but I think it's really about truly seeing the humanity in each other and sharing the struggles and the successes of home and community-based services. And because we know it's better for the individual to live in their own natural home and community, to go to their own churches, to support their local grocery store, et cetera. And I will add too that particularly with the government as it currently is, so we have a majority Republican government federally in terms of legislature and statewide in terms of legislature. We also like to remind them that it's fiscally conservative to support home and community-based services. So home and community-based services range from, an hour of personal assistance to individualized supported living, where you're living in a home with 4 or fewer adults, but it's in a community just like any home we all live in, but you have 24/7 staffing. So that's the most expensive home and community-based service, and we expect that to cost the state somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 per year. Which is a lot. But if we serve these individuals in institutions, or as Missouri likes to call them, habilitation centers, we're looking at about $600,000 a year. So while it may seem like the cost of HCBS is going up, more and more people are choosing it, which is a good thing. And more people are living longer and better lives and more satisfactory lives. And as you guys would say, they're living their good life, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's really helpful, Christina, context. I think sometimes it's hard not to think about the dollars you won't spend if you invest in something, right? So investing in home and community-based services reduces spending that what you'd otherwise have. And a lot of times if you're just looking at the line item on the budget, you might say this seems like too much, but actually it would be far more to have more intensive rehabilitative services in an institution like that. So I think that's really great context.
Worth noting, the governor did propose an increase to the habilitation centers of multi-million dollars this year. And each year, the census, the amount of people these 3 habilitation centers serve, goes down. So right now, it's it's about 300 people living in HAB centers in Missouri who have IDD. And we see this, it's not just Governor Kehoe. There's been a history in Missouri of habilitation centers serving fewer and fewer people, but getting more and more money. And so I think, while we can't tell as MODDC our officials what to do, we like to point that out to show that there may be opportunities there to serve people well and as maybe crass as it sounds, more cheaply.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. I didn't quite realize that budget item keeps going up, but they're serving less and less people. We talked a lot about different policies that the DD Council is keeping track of, that you all are keeping track of. And I think knowing all these proposed changes, and there's a lot of concern, right? And also
fear in the disability community and in the broader community about what these changes might mean. But what is giving you all hope about the future of disability policy in Missouri and or federally? Like, what are you guys clinging to that's giving you hope that people can kind of latch onto and see that differences are being made?
I think it gives hope to see everyone come out and support and rally around individuals with disabilities like we're seeing locally. But I do want to add just kind of my own personal take on that, is that it's not just when the heat is turned up on the oven, but it's the end-to-end cycle of this. And so Christina was talking about relationships, and really it's relationships over outrage is how I would probably phrase it. We can be outraged at potential cuts. We can be outraged at potential decisions, but I think you get a lot further with honey than you do with vinegar. And when you have a solid relationship and you're able to sit across the table from a legislator, and they know your family members, they know what you do for a living, they know the true impact to a life. It's almost like the telephone game from back when you were a kid and you played. The message may get changed on the other end, but you have to be close enough to share that message. And I think when there's more clarity, when the message is being shared across the length, rather than me sharing my message personally, if I have the relationships with others and I'm able to have those decision makers share my message, that has a lot more weight to it than little old Dr. Tony Taylor from Raytown, Missouri. I mean, who in the world is that, and why does that matter? But when you have legislators that are carrying that straight into the decision maker's office, putting it on their desk, and they meet with them daily, that has a much stronger impact than one voice. But it's that multiple voices coming together, not in outrage, but in relationship, that people are willing to hear when you present information in a way that's digestible. So I think those relationships are far more important, and it is end to end. It's not just when decisions are being made, but as they're implemented, as they're carried out, as they're monitored for compliance, as they're impacting lives on the end to end. And we mentioned the phrase earlier, 360 degrees. It's not just when decisions are made, but when they're completely carried out across lives throughout Missouri.
That's very particular to legislative advocacy, but I do like to remind everyone, right, that advocacy is a huge pie, right? And legislative advocacy, which is what we do, and systems change advocacy, because some things are not legislative that we do, but that's one slice of the pie. And I think in a healthy democracy, there are people who prefer to be in the streets peacefully, right? I'm not advocating for anything otherwise, but there's a range of actions you can take, and it's important to consider where you want to be. Legislative advocacy is a very particular kind of advocacy. So going in and yelling with signs is not going to win a legislator over in their office. But that doesn't mean there's not a place for healthy engagement in a range of ways. So it's important to remember that too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I did go with, you mentioned MacDDS. I went to, the MacDDS had a day where they went and did some advocacy, and we went up and joined them with some of those discussions. And it was really, it was super interesting. And I've never been a person to do legislative advocacy, but in the last year, because of some of the things that have happened, I've kind of entered that world a little bit more and have been pleasantly surprised at just how accessible to use our name of our podcast, but how accessible our legislators, both nationally and locally, are. And it's not something I ever actually realized before this year. So that's been a really good learning for me.
To go back to accessibility, one systems change thing that we're working on that's not policy, so we actually can suggest what they should do to an extent, is we are trying to make Senate hearings and Senate floor debate and all of that live streamed with captions. We're asking the Senate to allow people to submit written testimony online, because for accessibility reasons of all sorts, not just disability related, people can't always get to Jefferson City. Our Senate, because the House in Missouri already does that. our Senate is one of 2 legislative chambers in the whole country that has held out and has not done this. So it's really time. We want to help Missourians be more engaged, and senators are representing all of us, and so they should be willing to hear from us, more directly as possible, because not everyone can get to the Capitol, and the Capitol is not the most accessible building. It's 150 years old. There have been improvements, but we're not going to say it's perfect.
I think that there's sometimes this sense of like, that people, maybe whether it's at the local or state or federal level, that my voice won't matter, right? Like if I email my legislator, or if I go to the Hill or whatever, so why even try? And so what I'm just hearing in all of your stories, even yours, George, is just that there is hope in that, like those relationships do matter, that advocacy does matter, and it really can make a difference. And we have a great history here in the United States of that advocacy making a difference, right? And leading to policy change. And so I think that's just a takeaway for me, is like not to get bogged down in that idea that like it's not going to make a difference, so why try? Like if we all really believed it would make a difference, imagine how many more voices could be heard and stories could be shared. And so I think that's a really great point you both made.
Yeah, I think it's critical. Christina mentioned earlier, there's several ways to stay informed, and the links that she's going to be sharing and the other information is so helpful for any family members or self-advocates to be aware. And I think it starts there is to be informed, take that step. It does make a difference. Build those relationships, maintain those, and stay engaged even after these headlines fade, even beyond this critical juncture right now. It's a lot more than just when it's in the news. It's important because those relationships need to continue long term, and advocacy at the systems level is how we go from charity to justice. So it's very important.
I would say too, Missouri has been here before, right? In the early aughts, Missouri made some significant cuts to Medicaid, and it galvanized people. There were a few rough years. It was before my time in terms of doing this kind of work. But people won eventually and got their benefits back. And I think we have to look to history to learn some lessons there. I also think too, the amazing amount of family advocates who are stepping up and individuals saying, we need our self-directed supports. This is the only way we're surviving is really important. And they've turned up, we're talking thousands of emails being sent. So all of that gives me hope, as well as, the Showing at Disability Rights Legislative Day. The other thing that gives me hope is that we're really, at least from my position, I'm trying to talk to providers, families, individuals, that we all need to be on the same page and say no cuts to home and community-based services. And I think the more unified that message is, the more powerful it will be. And a great example of this is the Starling Provider Association on Disability Rights Legislative Day had talking points, and their number one talking point was no cuts to self-directed supports. Now, not a single provider can do self-directed supports by the nature of that work, right? But they understand that many of them are serving people who access self-directed supports, maybe in a day program, maybe in a job support kind of program, et cetera. And so it's really important, too, that families are also speaking up for providers as well. We really need to go into this unified. And I think the more that message gets out, the more hopeful I am, for sure.
All right. Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you both so much. If people wanted to learn more, I know Christina in particular, you've given us a few things to look out for, but how could we either learn more about you, or can you remind us of those resources that we should access if we want to learn more?
Yeah, the Missouri Developmental Disability Council website is a good place to look, and that's MODD Council, COUNCIL.org. So there's a lot of information there. I will send a link of where exactly to find the newsletter, because it's a few steps into the website, but I'll get you a direct link to share out. And I also think a piece of this for all of us is kind of getting over that we don't have to be experts on everything. That's my job, right? But you're the expert on your life. You're the expert or on your loved one's life, or they're the expert on their life, right? And so you have to be willing to share the stories and learn. But if a legislator is saying, well, give me more specifics, feel free to send them my way. You can find my email address as well on the website. And those are the conversations I'm happy to have. But I don't want you to doubt your own ability to change someone's mind just through your own personal story. So don't, undercut yourself there.
Great. Thank you. And Tony, if someone needs some vending services or T-shirts, you want to promote any businesses you know of?
Sure. Yeah. My daughter's business is wearthejoy.shop. So it's WEARTHEJOY.shop. And that's my daughter, Jaylee Grace Taylor. So that's why we went with Jaylee GT. So I report to her, and she's I call her the CTO, the Chief T-shirt Officer. But then my son is jonahvending.com, JONAH vending.com. There's a news article out there. Local NBC Channel 41 had interviewed him a few years ago when he just got started. But there's additional information. There's no cost of vending machine placement at businesses through Jonah Vending. And he just absolutely they both just receive joy every time they do their purpose. And so that's why we're happy to do it as a family. But that's jonahvending.com. So
great. Thank you so much. And I think I actually saw that on TV. So I didn't put it together until just now, but I did see that. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you both so much. We really, really appreciate your time.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
We're excited to announce that Accessible has a book club. So join the Accessible team for a live virtual discussion of Being Human, Judy Heuman's powerful memoir on disability rights, leadership, and collective action.
We'll gather on April 2nd, starting at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on Zoom. And the conversation is open to students, faculty, staff, and members of the public. To register, check out the link in our show notes.
And if you can't join us live, no worries. We'll share the conversation later as an episode of the Accessible podcast and on the UMKC Institute for Human Development YouTube channel.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Accessible. Accessible is hosted and produced by George Gatto, Amelia Reigard, and Catherine Toller from the University of Missouri, Kansas City Institute for Human Development, which is the home of the Missouri USED. Accessible is a joint project between the Missouri USED and the Missouri LEND program, which is funded by the Health Resources and Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services through grant number T73MC00022. Episodes of Accessible are released every 2 weeks and can be found wherever you subscribe to your podcasts. Join us next time to hear more insights and ideas from leaders in the disability world.